Dr. Nightechoes. I was around 16 when this happened. I was sitting on the couch with my dad late at night watching TV. We were the only ones home. The house was quiet in that normal end-of-day way, where you don't expect anything to happen. At one point, I noticed movement in the reflection of the TV screen. It was quick, a shape passing behind me. I didn't turn right away because my brain filled in the answer for me. I assumed it was my sister walking through the room. It didn't feel strange at first. It felt normal. A few seconds passed and something clicked. I remembered she wasn't supposed to be home. I asked my dad, casually, if someone had just walked behind us. He didn't even look away from the TV when he said, "Yeah, pretty sure that was your sister." Then he paused. I watched his face change as the realization hit him at the same time it hit me. She wasn't home. We muted the TV and stood up. We checked the kitchen first, then the hallway, her room, the bathroom, every door, every light. The house was empty. No open windows, no unlocked doors, nothing out of place. We went back to the living room and turned the TV back on, not really watching it anymore. About 10 minutes later, we heard a loud bang come from somewhere down the hall. It sounded like a door being hit hard. We froze and listened. A while later, it happened again. Same sound, different place. It went on like that for the rest of the night. Not constant, just enough time between the noises for us to relax and then tense up all over again. We didn't investigate after the first sweep. We stayed on the couch until morning. Nothing else ever showed itself that clearly. No voices, no footsteps we could follow, just those occasional sounds and the memory of seeing someone who shouldn't have been there. I don't really believe in ghosts. I still don't. But I lived in that house for years, and this wasn't the only thing that happened there. It was just the first time the house made a mistake and showed us something it shouldn't have. When I was 17, our neighbor's son died from a drug overdose. He had just graduated high school the night before. I had seen him around, but never really interacted with him. However, his dad and my dad were close, helpful neighbors, so I had developed a small friendship with his father. A few weeks later, his dad came over with a box of things he wanted to get rid of. All of it belonged to his son, Nathan. He asked if I wanted any of it, and I said yes. It felt awkward, but I also felt like he needed me to take them. Inside the box was a pair of light blue and white Jordans. They were pretty old, but I figured I could use them for weed eating and general yard work. Later on, I noticed something written on the tongue of the shoes. N.B. Nathan Black. That gave me chills. I'm not sure why it took realizing that Nathan had written his name on the shoes for it to feel strange, but it did. That still wasn't the creepiest part. A few weeks later, I was home alone. I left my room and headed down the hallway toward the kitchen. The house was pitch black. As soon as I rounded the corner, I saw a white figure about 15 feet ahead of me. What was strange was that I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt a weird sense of safety. I blinked several times, and the shape became clearer. It was Nathan, standing there and staring at me. After a few seconds, I slammed the hallway light switch as hard as I could, and he was gone. This happened a few more times while I was living there. I don't know what to think about it. Part of me feels like he was watching over me. Another part of me wonders if he was upset that I was slowly ruining his Jordans. It happened at exactly 3 a.m. I know because the number was burned into my head afterward. I woke up to sound. Not a sudden blast, but something slowly getting louder. I opened my eyes and saw the TV volume bar climbing on its own, one notch at a time. For a second, I thought my cat had stepped on the remote. I reached over and grabbed it. She wasn't anywhere near it. The remote wasn't pressed against anything. The volume kept rising. My heart started racing. I shut the TV off and sat up in bed, listening to the silence that followed. The room felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. I kept staring at the TV, waiting for it to turn itself back on. About a minute later, my boyfriend came into the room. He looked annoyed and half awake. He said his computer had screwed up. He'd been in the other room all night, like usual, mixing and recording music with his headphones on. I asked him what happened. He said the volume on his computer had suddenly started increasing on its own. He said it got so loud he had to rip his headphones off. He hadn't touched anything. No keyboard, no dial, no mouse. I asked him when it happened. He stopped talking and looked at me strangely. Then he said, like, a minute ago. We just stood there staring at each other. Neither of us laughed. Neither of us tried to explain it. The apartment was quiet, but it didn't feel calm. It felt aware. We checked everything. The TV settings, the computer settings, the remotes, the cables. Nothing showed any errors. Nothing was loose. Nothing repeated the issue. Everything worked perfectly afterward. We went back to bed, but I couldn't relax. Every small sound made my stomach tighten. I kept expecting the TV to turn back on, or the computer to start blasting noise again. It didn't. What scared me wasn't that two devices malfunctioned. It was the timing. The way it happened in two different rooms to two different people within the same minute. Like something tested one signal, then tried another. I didn't sleep again that night. I eventually took a Xanax just to shut my thoughts off. Even then, I dreamed about volume bars climbing with no sound at all, like something was turning itself up, waiting for us to notice again. It was around 2 a.m. when it happened. I had been dealing with sleep problems for months by then. I would wake up suddenly for no reason, heart racing, body alert, like something had already gone wrong. That night, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud, it was close. A slow, wet noise, like licking or chewing, steady and patient. The room was dim, lit only by moonlight through the blinds. I couldn't see clearly without my contacts. Everything was blurred at the edges. I lay still, listening. The sound was coming from beside my bed, not under it, not across the room, right there. I turned my head slowly. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then I saw the shape. It was low to the floor, close to the mattress, folded in on itself in a way that didn't make sense. Its limbs were bent wrong, tucked and angled like joints were facing the wrong direction. It looked almost human, but only in the way a broken mannequin does. Familiar, but off. It was moving its hands over its body in short, repetitive motions, grooming, cleaning. I could hear the sound clearly now. Soft licking, small, precise movements, like it was focused, like I wasn't important enough to acknowledge. I couldn't move. My chest felt tight, like I was being held down. I remember thinking that if it noticed me, something would happen that I couldn't undo. I closed my eyes and held my breath, hoping it would finish whatever it was doing and leave. After what felt like a long time, I reached one hand toward the lamp. My fingers shook so badly I missed the switch the first time. I tried again and turned the light on. The space beside my bed was empty. No marks, no smell, no sign anyone or anything had been there. But the sound didn't stop right away. It continued for a few seconds after the light came on, right next to me, before fading out. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I haven't slept well since. Sometimes, when I wake up suddenly, I still hear it for a moment. Always close, always careful. I was around 12 or 13 when it happened. I was at a friend's house after school, sitting at the dining table, working on homework. His dining room always felt strange to me, though I couldn't explain why back then. One entire wall was covered in large mirrors, not decorative ones, just flat, wide mirrors that reflected the whole room, no matter where you sat. I was focused on my paper when I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. At first, I assumed it was my friend's mom shifting in her chair. I didn't look right away. I kept writing. The movement didn't stop. I glanced up. In the mirror, behind me, there was an old man standing near the doorway. He was dressed in clothes that didn't fit the time. A fedora, a suit jacket that looked heavy and worn. He had a newspaper tucked neatly under his arm. He wasn't looking at me. He was just standing there, like he was waiting for something. I turned my head to look directly behind me. There was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, he was gone. I must have reacted because my friend's mom noticed immediately. She asked what was wrong. I told her what I thought I saw, trying to laugh it off as a trick of the mirrors. I remember her face changing when I mentioned the clothes. She didn't say anything. She just stood up and walked into another room. She came back with an old photograph. It was black and white. The edges were bent. The man in the photo was standing in front of the same dining room, wearing the same fedora and jacket. He was holding a newspaper under his arm in the exact same way. She told me it was her grandfather. He had lived in the house years ago. He used to read the paper in that room every evening. I asked her why the mirrors were there. She said her grandmother had them installed after he died. She said it made the room feel less empty. I didn't go back into that dining room after that day. Even now, I avoid rooms with mirrors on more than one wall. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection from the corner of my eye, I still expect to see someone standing just behind me, waiting to be noticed again. I was driving home from work late one night, sometime after 10. It wasn't a deserted road, but it wasn't busy either. Just a normal suburban stretch with houses set back a little, streetlights spaced out, and long, quiet gaps between cars. I drove it often and knew every bend. I remember thinking about dinner when something moved in front of my headlights. A little girl ran into the road from the right side. She wasn't running from the sidewalk or a driveway. She came from nowhere, like she had already been in motion before my lights reached her. She looked like she was chasing something small, her arms slightly out, head tilted forward with focus. I slammed my foot toward the brake without even thinking. She stopped in the middle of my lane and looked straight at my car. She was wearing a dress that didn't fit the time. It had a stiff shape and a small white apron sewn onto the front, the kind I'd only seen in old family photos from the 50s or 60s. Her shoes were dark. Her hair was neat, too neat for a kid running into traffic. Before the car even slowed, she disappeared. There was no step back, no blur, no sense of movement. 1 second she was there, the next, The road was empty, like someone had erased her from the frame. I pulled over and sat there with the engine running, staring at the stretch of asphalt where she had stood. I got out and checked the sides of the road. There was nowhere she could have gone that fast. No yards close enough, no trees, no sound, nothing. I drove home shaken and barely slept that night. For the rest of the year I lived there, I drove that same road almost every night. I slowed down at the exact spot every time without meaning to. I scanned the shoulders. I watched the shadows from the trees. I never saw her again. What stays with me isn't how strange it was. It's how ordinary she looked. Like she belonged there once. Like I interrupted something unfinished. Sometimes I still think about how she looked at my car. Not scared, not surprised. Just checking if I was really there before she wasn't anymore. My grandmother hated cats. Not dislike. Hate. She never allowed one inside her apartment. Ever. Everyone in the family knew that. So when she woke up in the middle of the night and saw a black cat sitting on my grandfather's chest, her first reaction wasn't fear. It was anger. She said she woke suddenly, the way you do when something feels wrong before you understand why. The room was quiet, too quiet. My grandfather was lying on his back, perfectly still. On his chest was a cat she didn't recognize, solid black, sitting upright, calm, watching her. She grabbed the broom she kept beside the bed and shouted. The cat didn't run right away. It turned its head toward her, slow and deliberate, like it was annoyed to be interrupted. That's when she swung. The cat jumped off my grandfather and bolted out of the bedroom. She chased it, yelling, heart pounding, down the hallway and toward the front door. The cat didn't hesitate. It ran straight at the door and passed through it, not under it, not as it opened, through it, like the door wasn't there at all. She stopped short, broom still raised, trying to make sense of what she'd just seen. She stood there for a while, confused and embarrassed, convinced she must have been half asleep. Eventually, she went back to the bedroom. That's when she noticed my grandfather hadn't moved. She touched his arm. It was cold. She shook him. He didn't respond. Paramedics arrived, then police, then silence again. They said he had died in his sleep from a heart attack. Quiet, fast, probably painless. Later that morning, after everything settled, one of the investigators asked her a strange question. He asked if they owned a cat. She said no, absolutely not. He showed her the carpet at the foot of the bed. There were paw prints, small, clear, pressed into the fibers like something had paced there for a while before leaving. They didn't lead to the door. They just stopped. My grandmother never slept in that apartment again. She moved out within the month. She still refuses to talk about cats. And every once in a while, she asks if anyone else in the family has seen black marks on the floor that don't belong to anything living. Last year, my family went camping at the same park we visit every year. We usually book the same campsite, which is close to the bathrooms and showers. This time, we booked a little late and ended up with a site far in the back of the park, in a fairly secluded area surrounded by woods. It was a nice change, but also a bit of a hassle, with lots of extra walking to go fishing or use the bathroom. The first night, my nephew woke up in the middle of the night and woke my sister, telling her there was someone outside the tent. She spoke out loud and then leaned against the tent wall. He got scared and pushed back. She went outside to check, but there was nothing there. We dismissed it as a raccoon, even though my sister didn't think that was the case. The second night, we had a few friends visit our site. They brought their dog, who is easily the most well-behaved dog I've ever met, both around people and other animals. While we were sitting around the fire, the dog suddenly started barking aggressively. She was tied to a picnic table away from the fire and people. This kind of behavior was extremely rare for her, so her owner got up to see what was wrong. When he removed the leash from the table, she lunged toward the forest and pulled him nearly 10 feet. He clearly wasn't expecting it, and she had never acted that way before. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the area of the forest she was focused on. There was nothing there. She had seen squirrels, raccoons, and cats before and never reacted like that. Everyone agreed it was strange, but we dismissed it, although it did bring up the conversation about what my nephew had seen the night before. On the third and final night, we could see a storm rolling in. The sky was lighting up with flashes of lightning, thunder was booming, and the wind was intense. We spent about an hour setting up tarps and securing chairs. Everyone crawled into their tents, knowing the storm was about to hit. I was the last one outside because I had to pee. I stood at the edge of the campsite, facing the forest, peeing into the wind. The storm and the trees were already unsettling, but then I heard it. From the forest came the sound of a little girl singing. It wasn't a pop song. It had the slow, steady rhythm of a nursery rhyme. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew it was a child's voice. There were no other sounds or voices. I finished as fast as I could. The moment I turned toward my tent, a loud crack of thunder hit, and I dove inside just as the rain started. My heart was pounding. I was sweating, and I might have been a little wet for reasons I won't explain. The next morning, I told my family what I heard. I don't think anyone fully believed me, but it happened, and it was terrifying. I was working the night shift as the on-call doctor. I'm easily startled, and I was already exhausted. It was around 3 a.m. when I went back to a ward I'd started my night in, just to check on a patient who had been unwell earlier. I spoke with the nurses at the desk first. They told me the patient was doing much better. His observations had improved, and there were no concerns. They said his chart was at the end of the bed. That was all I needed. I walked into the bay and pulled the curtain around his bed. I didn't want to wake the other patients, so I used the torch on my phone instead of turning on the lights. I leaned over and checked the chart. Everything looked fine. I felt relieved. It was one less thing to worry about. When I turned around, someone was standing directly in front of me. He was inches away, an old man, hunched over, wearing a hospital gown. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard the curtain move. He was just there, breathing quietly, staring at me in the dark. My body reacted before my mind did. I jumped back and yelled. I knocked over a drip stand, and it crashed loudly onto the floor. The nurses came running in. I told them someone had been standing right behind me. One of them laughed. She put her hand on my shoulder and said there was no one there. She said the bay was empty. I looked again. She was right. The space was clear. No old man, no movement, nothing. I felt stupid. I stepped out into the hallway to calm myself down. A moment later, a nurse from another ward approached us. She looked pale and shaken. She asked if we had seen an elderly man wandering. Before anyone could answer, she said an old man in room 408 had just died. She said he'd been confused and trying to get out of bed earlier in the night. I asked what he looked like. She described him without hesitation. Thin, bent forward when he walked. Hospital gown hanging loose. Room 408 wasn't on our ward. No one spoke for a few seconds. Someone finally said it was just exhaustion. That night shifts play tricks on your mind. I nodded and went back to work. But I know what I saw. I knew someone was there before I turned around. And when I said it out loud, I was told there was no one at all. It happened during a night shift that felt normal until it wasn't. The woman was rolled into the trauma room already unconscious. She wasn't breathing. There was no pulse when we checked. Her skin was cool and gray in a way that usually means we're already too late. We moved fast anyway. Someone started bagging her. Someone else cut her clothes. The monitor showed nothing useful. No rhythm, no activity. We started CPR almost immediately. I climbed onto the stool and began chest compressions. Hard, steady, counting out loud without thinking about it. Her body moved the way bodies do during CPR. The chest rose and fell under my hands. Her head shifted slightly with each push. Her arms lay straight at her sides, palms facing down, fingers curled loosely. They looked heavy, lifeless. I remember noticing her fingernails were painted a pale pink. A few minutes in, while I was still compressing, something changed. I felt pressure on my wrists. At first, I thought someone had bumped into me. Then I realized it was her. Her hands lifted off the bed, both of them, slow but deliberate. They came up and wrapped around my wrists. Her grip wasn't strong, but it was real. Skin on skin, fingers closing. She held on for maybe 2 seconds. I froze. I didn't stop compressions, but my brain completely stalled. Her eyes never opened. Her face didn't move. She didn't gasp or breathe. Then her hands fell back down to the sides of the bed. They landed wrong. One arm slipped halfway off the table and hung there. No one else said anything. I don't know if they saw it. The room kept moving like nothing had happened. Someone called out times. Someone adjusted medications. I kept going, but my hands were shaking now. We worked her for a long time. Too long. There was never a rhythm, never a response. Eventually, the doctor called it. We stopped. The room got quiet. Her arms were still where they fell, one hanging off the bed. I stepped back and stared at my wrists. There were faint red marks where her fingers had been. We never got her back. I still don't know why she reached for me. I just know she was already gone when she did. I work with geriatric patients, and there was an incident about 3 years ago. Before I explain, let me say that I don't believe in ghosts. One night I was working the night shift and felt extremely tired. I wasn't hungry, so I decided to skip lunch and go to my car to sleep for about 30 minutes. I got into my car, covered myself with my sweater, set a timer on my phone, and immediately fell asleep. I started dreaming, but in the dream, I was still awake, sitting in my car. Someone tapped on my car window, and when I looked up, I saw one of my patients. I'll call her D. Surprised, I asked her what she was doing outside. She told me she was looking for her daughter. I told her to go back inside and that we would call her daughter in the morning. Suddenly, Dee became angry and started banging on my car window. I panicked and tried to reach for the door handle to get out and calm her down, but I quickly realized I couldn't move. I should mention that I experience sleep paralysis fairly often, so even though I was asleep, I understood what was happening. I tried to fight it by squirming my body and forcing myself to wake up. Eventually, I managed to wake up, My heart was racing and my forehead was sweaty. I sat there for about a minute, realized it had all been a dream, and rolled the window down to cool off. When my break ended, I clocked back in and noticed my supervisor and 2 other nurses huddled outside a room. They saw me and called me over. I assumed something was wrong with a ventilator or that a patient had fallen. Instead, my supervisor told me that Dee had died while I was on my lunch break. Since most of our patients are DNR, I hadn't been paged. It took a moment for that to sink in. I felt a rush of fear and goosebumps, but didn't mention the dream to anyone. I still don't believe in ghosts. I assume I had that dream because Dee was the last patient I spoke to before my break, and she was still on my mind as I mentally reviewed patient charts. First job as a doctor when this happened. It was a night shift, and the hospital was busy. I was already exhausted when a ward called to tell me a patient had passed away. It was an expected death, so no one had called earlier. They just needed me to verify it and complete the paperwork. It took me hours to get there. By the time I reached the ward, it was quiet. A nurse told me the patient was in room 8. The door was slightly open, and the lights were off. Most patients on that ward were in shared bays, so we were used to not turning lights on unless necessary. I didn't want to look nervous, so I slipped inside using only the small pen torch I kept in my pocket. The window was cracked open. The blind tapped softly against the sill. I moved toward the bed, the beam of light shaking as it traced over the white hospital blanket. She was very small, frail. You could barely see the rise of her body beneath the covers. When the light reached her face, my stomach dropped. Her mouth was pulled back in a wide, frozen snarl, teeth exposed. Her eyes were open, staring straight ahead, white and unmoving. Both hands were raised near her face, fingers curled inward like claws. Her nails looked long in the dim light. I had to bite down hard to keep from making a sound. I knew what I had to do. To verify death, I had to check for breathing, listen for a heartbeat, feel for a pulse, test pupil response, and confirm no reaction to pain. I forced myself closer. I flicked the torch across her eyes. No reaction. I reached out and pressed against her shoulder. Nothing. My hands were shaking when I placed my fingers on her throat. I was inches from her face now. I could not look away. To place my stethoscope, I had to lean even closer, nearly nose to nose with her. I stood there like that for 2 full minutes. I didn't hear anything. Even if she had been alive, I don't think I would have noticed. All I could hear was my own heart pounding. Over and over in my head, the same thought repeated. Please don't move. Please don't move. When it was over, I stepped back and finished the paperwork as quickly as I could. I still think about that room sometimes, about how dark it was, about how close I had to get, and about how long 2 minutes can feel when you're waiting for something that shouldn't happen. I work as a nurse in an intensive care unit. I was taking care of a man with a history of esophageal cancer. He had surgery months earlier and recovered well enough to go home. This time, he came back with pneumonia and trouble breathing. We had to place him on a ventilator shortly after he arrived. At first, everything looked stable. His blood pressure was normal. His heart rhythm was steady. His oxygen levels were acceptable. He was awake and followed commands when we spoke to him. He squeezed my hand when I asked. Nothing about him felt urgent or unstable at the time. Then it happened without warning. His blood pressure dropped suddenly. The monitor alarms went off at once. I checked for a pulse and couldn't find one. We called a code blue and started CPR immediately. The room filled with staff. We worked on him for nearly an hour before we finally got his pulse back. Afterward, we ran every test we could. Blood work, imaging, everything came back normal. No one could explain why he had crashed. He lay there quietly while the machines kept him alive. 15 minutes later, his blood pressure dropped again. This time, it fell faster. He lost his pulse a second time. We started CPR again. We worked on him for another long hour. This time, he never came back. The doctor pronounced him dead. The room went quiet. We turned off the machines and covered him. His wife arrived later. She was calm in a way that didn't feel normal. While I stayed with her, she told me about a conversation they had days earlier. She reminded him about an appointment with a home health nurse scheduled for Saturday. He told her he wouldn't be there. She asked where he was going. He told her he didn't know. He only said he wouldn't be here. This conversation happened on Wednesday. He was admitted Thursday. He died Friday night at 11:30. I still think about how certain he sounded. Not scared, not confused, just sure. I was helping a patient sign her admission paperwork when this happened. It was a quiet afternoon. The unit was calm. She was older, but she seemed clear and oriented. She answered my questions without hesitation. She joked a little. Nothing about her behavior felt off. We were sitting near the window while I explained the forms. She signed her name carefully. Her handwriting was shaky but steady enough. I remember thinking she was doing better than most patients her age. I turned the page and kept talking. Then she stopped listening. She looked past me and toward the window. Her face changed, but not in a dramatic way. It was subtle, like something had briefly caught her attention. She leaned forward slightly and squinted. She asked me, very calmly, if I had just seen that. I asked her what she meant. I hadn't seen anything. The street outside looked the same as it always did. Cars, people walking, nothing unusual. She said a man had just jumped off the building. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound scared. She said it the way someone would comment on the weather. I walked to the window and looked down. There was nothing there. No crowd, no noise, no movement, no reason to believe anything had happened. When I turned back to her, she was already shaking her head. She looked embarrassed. She looked tired. She told me not to worry. She said her mind wasn't right anymore. She laughed quietly and apologized for seeing things again. I didn't know what to say. I finished the paperwork while my hands felt unsteady. She signed the last page and thanked me. She acted normal after that. Too normal. I stepped out of the room and checked with another staff member. No one else had seen or heard anything. No codes were called. No sirens. Nothing. Later that day, I passed her room again. She was staring out the same window. She didn't notice me standing there. I didn't ask what she was looking at. What scared me wasn't the idea that she imagined something. It was how certain she sounded before she corrected herself. How easily she dismissed it, like this wasn't new for her. I think about that moment more than I should, about how clear she was, right up until she wasn't. Every time I forget why I walked into a room, I think about her, and I wonder how long it takes before you stop trusting what you see. I was working in the ICU when this happened. It was a normal shift, nothing chaotic, just the usual steady alarms and quiet movement that fills the unit late at night. I was helping a patient sit up at the edge of the bed. She had been restless for a while, shifting and gripping the sheets like she needed something she couldn't explain. She didn't speak much English. She kept repeating the same word over and over. Stand, stand. Her voice wasn't panicked, it was urgent but calm, like a request she had already decided on. I asked her if she was sure. She nodded and tightened her grip on my arm. I helped her stand. She was smaller than I expected, light, fragile in a way that made me tense immediately. She stood there for a few seconds, feet planted on the floor, shoulders straight. She looked relieved. Her breathing slowed. For a moment, it felt like that was all she needed. Then something in me said to sit her back down. There was no alarm, no change on the monitor yet, just a sudden, heavy feeling in my chest. I guided her back toward the bed, keeping one arm around her shoulders. Before her head even touched the pillow, her body went slack. Her eyes rolled back. It happened so fast I didn't have time to call out. 1 second she was standing, the next she was gone. Her weight collapsed into my arms. I lowered her the rest of the way down and called for help. But I already knew. The room changed instantly. The monitors caught up a moment later. She had suffered a massive stroke. I don't know what she understood in that moment. I don't know if she knew what was coming. But I like to believe that when she asked me to help her stand, it was the last thing she needed to do, and that I gave her that. I was out to dinner with my family in a small skiing village where we had recently bought a cottage. It was our first time eating out since arriving, and the restaurant had been recommended by locals. Nothing about the place stood out at first. It was warm, busy, and loud, with people coming in from the cold. The moment we walked through the door, my little sister stopped moving. She looked around slowly, like she was trying to remember something. Then she said, very casually, "I know this place. My mother and I used to paint here." My mom laughed at first and told her we had never been there before. She thought my sister was just playing around. My sister shook her head and corrected her. She said, "No, my mother from before. We used to paint here all the time." She didn't sound excited or confused. She sounded certain. We all exchanged looks, but no one pushed it. She was young, and kids say strange things. We were seated, menus handed out, and the moment passed. Still, she kept looking around the room, studying the walls and the ceiling like she expected something to be different. Later, while the waitress was taking our order, my sister pointed toward the far side of the room. She said that's where the big tables used to be. She said the light was better there for painting. The waitress paused and asked her what she meant. My sister repeated herself. She said it used to be a place where people painted. She said her mother stood near the windows and she would sit on the floor with brushes that were too big for her hands. The waitress went quiet. Then she told us that the building had been an art studio for decades. It operated through most of the 1900s and only closed in the early 2000s when it was renovated into a restaurant. No one at the table spoke. The waitress stood there with her notepad lowered, staring at my sister. My sister didn't react at all. She just nodded, like that explained everything. We finished dinner in silence. On the way out, my sister looked back once and said she missed how it smelled before. She couldn't explain what she meant. Years later, she doesn't remember saying any of it. But every time I pass that restaurant, I still wonder who she was talking about when she said, "My mother from before." I don't remember any of this myself. I only know because my parents eventually told me years later, when I was old enough to ask questions that made them uncomfortable. When I was 4, I used to wake the entire house almost every night. It always started the same way. I would scream a name, Sarah, over and over, loud enough that my parents would run from their room thinking something was wrong. By the time they reached me, I would be sitting upright in bed, crying so hard I could barely breathe. They said I kept calling for help. Not their help, just help. Then I would start apologizing. I would repeat the same words again and again. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I wouldn't respond properly when they spoke to me. I wasn't really awake, just crying and shaking until my body wore itself out. In the morning, I never remembered anything. No dreams, no fear, nothing. My parents tried everything. Night lights, sitting with me until I fell asleep, talking to doctors. Nothing worked. The episodes kept happening for months. What confused them the most was the name, Sarah. We didn't know anyone named Sarah. I didn't go to preschool yet. We didn't have TV, no books with that name, no friends, no relatives. There was no reason for a 4-year-old to fixate on it, let alone scream it in terror every night. After almost a year, it stopped. Just like that. One night passed quietly, then another. My parents waited for it to come back, but it didn't. Eventually, my mom asked me about it during the day. She asked who Sarah was. She said I looked at her calmly and told her something strange. I said Sarah didn't want me to cry anymore. I said she didn't like it when I was upset, so I promised I would stop. That was all. I grew up without remembering any of this. Years later, as an adult, I mentioned to my parents that I always liked the name Sarah. I said it felt important to me for some reason. That's when they told me everything. I still don't remember the dreams, but sometimes, when I hear that name spoken softly, I feel a tightness in my chest. Not fear, guilt. Like I failed someone a long time ago, and I don't know who I was apologizing to, or why she finally forgave me. I was very young when it happened, too young to remember it myself. I only know about it because my mother still can't talk about it without her voice changing. I was a toddler, barely speaking in full sentences yet. One afternoon, my mother was sitting with me in the living room. I was playing on the floor with my toys, quiet for once. She said I suddenly looked up at her and studied her face in a way that made her uncomfortable. Not curious, not playful, just focused. Then I said, very clearly, I used to be your dad. She laughed at first. She thought it was something I picked up from a cartoon or a family joke. She asked me what I meant. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I stood up, walked over to her, and repeated it, slower this time, like she hadn't heard me properly the first time. I used to be your dad. She told me that wasn't possible. She said her dad had died. She said I was confused. I got upset, not crying, just frustrated. I remember that part. I remember feeling like she wasn't listening. I told her she used to sit next to my bed when I was sick. I told her she cried when I couldn't breathe right at the end. I told her she held my hand even when it scared her. She went very quiet. Her father had died suddenly, lung failure, 9 months before I was born. She asked me how I could know those things. I shrugged. I didn't understand why it mattered. To me, it felt obvious, like reminding someone of something they had forgotten. After that, she started paying close attention to me. She noticed things I said without realizing. How I avoided certain foods he hated. How I reacted strongly to songs he used to listen to. How I would get confused when she called me by my name, like it didn't fully belong to me yet. The strangest part is that it didn't last. As I got older, the memories faded. The certainty faded with them. By the time I was 4, I didn't remember saying any of it. When my mother asked, I laughed and told her she was making it up. Now I'm grown. I don't remember being anyone else. But sometimes, when she looks at me for too long, I know she's not just seeing her child. She's wondering who I was before she knew me. I never had biological children. I'm 60 now, and that's just how my life turned out. I married into a family instead. My partner and I have been together for nearly 30 years. Her kids grew up, they had kids of their own. I became a grandfather without ever being a father, and I was content with that. There was something from my past I rarely thought about. It felt buried, old, not useful to revisit. When I was 13 or 14, my girlfriend got pregnant. It was quick and quiet and handled without discussion. There was an abortion. That was the end of it, or so I believed. She once told me they were twins. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions either. I was a kid myself. Life moved on. Decades passed. One afternoon, my granddaughter, who was about 4 at the time, asked her mother a question out of nowhere. She wasn't upset. She wasn't playing. She asked it calmly, like she was asking about something she already understood. She said, "What happened to Papa's babies? There were 2 of them, but they're dead now." My daughter froze. She asked her where she heard that. My granddaughter shrugged. She said she just knew. She said it the same way kids say they know the sky is blue. When my partner told me, I laughed at first. Nervous laughter. Kids say strange things. They pick up ideas. They imagine stories. That's what I told myself. But later that night, I couldn't sleep. I realized no one in the family knew about the pregnancy. No one. Not my partner, not her children, not anyone who could have said something careless around a child. I had never spoken about it out loud. I barely let myself think about it. And my granddaughter didn't say 1 baby. She said 2. I started noticing small things after that. The way she sometimes stared at me, like she was waiting for me to remember something. The way she once asked why I looked sad when I watched her sleep. The way she held my hand tighter than necessary, like she was afraid I might disappear. I never asked her questions. I was afraid of the answers. I think about it more now that I'm older, about the timing, about the number, about how sure she sounded, about how some things don't seem to stay gone, even when you believe they're erased. I don't know what she remembers. I don't know who she thinks I am. I just know that sometimes, when she looks at me, it feels like she's counting. My grandmother used to tell this story quietly, like she was afraid it might hear her. My dad was around 2 or 3 years old when he said it. He wasn't upset. He wasn't crying. He said it casually, the way toddlers state facts without knowing they're supposed to matter. He told her that he had almost been born before. He said he was very sick that time. He said his body didn't work right, so he died. Then he said he had to wait and come back later. My grandmother laughed it off at first. She told him he was imagining things. She tried to redirect him to toys or cartoons. But he repeated it more than once, always the same way. He never changed the wording. He never added drama. He just stated it, like a memory. She asked him what he meant by before. He told her it was before he was her baby. He said he was in her belly, but it didn't last long. He said it hurt, and then it stopped. He said coming back took a long time. That was when my grandmother stopped smiling. Years before my dad was born, she had been pregnant. It was early, but not early enough to ignore. The pregnancy ended suddenly.
Doctors later told her it was likely caused by birth defects linked to a medication she had been prescribed at the time. She never spoke about it after that. Not to friends, not to family, not even to my grandfather. She had never mentioned it to my dad. No one had. There were no photos, no keepsakes, no stories. It wasn't discussed in the house. There was nothing for a toddler to overhear or repeat. After that conversation, my dad never brought it up again, not once. As he grew older, he had no memory of saying it. When my grandmother eventually told him the story as an adult, he laughed awkwardly and said, "Kids say strange things," but she never forgot the look on his face when he said it. Calm, certain, like he wasn't explaining a thought, but recalling an event. She said what stayed with her wasn't the words, it was the timing. The way his age lined up with how long she had grieved without realizing it. The way he said he had waited. She used to say that maybe some people don't get it right the first time. Maybe some lives knock once, leave quietly, and come back when the door is safer to open. My daughter started talking about her grandson before she could even say full sentences properly. She would mention him casually while playing. I assumed it was an imaginary friend. Kids invent things. I didn't think much of it at first. She said he lived somewhere else, not here. She called it her old house, her old neighborhood. That alone didn't make sense. She has never lived anywhere but this apartment. She has never even stayed overnight anywhere else. Still, she talked about him like he was real, like he belonged to her. A few nights ago, that changed. She came out of her room at bedtime crying so hard she could barely breathe. Not whining, not fussing, full sobbing. I picked her up and asked what was wrong. She buried her face in my shoulder and said she was sad because she missed her grandson. She said he lived in her old house, and she wanted to go back. I asked her what she meant by old house. She wiped her nose and said it was before. That was all she would say. After that night, I started asking questions. Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she laughed like it was a game. One evening, she told me he sleeps in a crib. She said it like that detail mattered. She also said his tongue was white. I didn't even know what to do with that. When I asked his name later, she said, Guga, and laughed until she fell over. I tried telling myself it was just imagination, but then she said something else. A few months ago, I lost a baby. Early, but not early enough to ignore. I never talked about it around her. I never cried in front of her. I tried to keep it contained. One afternoon, out of nowhere, she touched my stomach and said the baby was tired and went away. She said it the same calm way she talks about her grandson. I asked her how she knew that. She shrugged and said she remembered. Since then, I watch her more closely at night. Sometimes she stares down the hallway like she's listening. Sometimes she talks softly to no one I can see. When I ask who she's talking to, she says she's telling him good night. She doesn't seem scared. That's what scares me. She talks like someone who already lived a whole life, like someone who lost things before, like someone who knows what it feels like to miss someone you're not supposed to remember at all. I remember telling my mother about my royal family when I was around 3 years old. She laughed it off at the time, the way parents do when a toddler says something strange but harmless. I didn't know how to explain it properly then. I barely know how to explain it now. I just knew it felt real. The memory has never faded. I'm standing in a desert as the sun is going down. The light is orange and heavy, like the air itself is tired. In front of us is a shallow pool of dark water. It isn't large, but everyone treats it like it matters more than anything else around us. No one touches it. No one steps too close. There's a quiet tension in the air, like the wrong move could ruin something important. I know the people with me. I know them without knowing how. One of them is my younger brother. He's curious, restless. He doesn't understand why everyone is so serious. He kneels down and splashes the water with his hand. Just once. Everything changes. People rush forward, voices rise, anger and fear mix together. Someone grabs him and pulls him back. I don't remember the words that were said, only the feeling that something sacred had been violated, something that couldn't be undone. Even now, when I think about it, my chest tightens the same way it did in that moment. That memory stayed with me as I grew up. I never talked about it much. I didn't want to sound crazy. It felt private, like something I wasn't supposed to share. When I was 16, I met someone who would later become a close friend. We stayed friends for years. When we were 18, we ended up talking about reincarnation late one night. I mentioned, carefully, that I sometimes felt like I remembered another life. He went quiet. Then he told me a story. He described standing in a desert at sunset, a dark, shallow pool. People gathered around it. He said he was the younger brother. He said he touched the water. He said everyone got angry. I had never told him my memory. Not once. We sat there in silence after that. Neither of us laughed. Neither of us tried to explain it away. I still don't know what that place was, or who we were supposed to be. I just know that somewhere, in some way, we both remember the same mistake. And whatever was lost at that pool, it feels like it's still waiting for us to understand it.